Washington, D.C. was still buzzing with the aftermath of the 2024 presidential election, where Donald J. Trump had reclaimed the presidency. His administration was now moving full steam ahead. One of the key appointments that had tongues wagging across political circles was none other than Pam Bondi, former Florida Attorney General, now elevated to United States Attorney General. Tough, fearless, and deeply loyal to the Constitution, Bondi had already made waves in her new post, going after bureaucratic overreach and weaponized lawfare. But no one anticipated the storm that was about to break out in Fulton County, Georgia. It all began with an anonymous tip sent to the Department of Justice's Office of Public Integrity. The email was brief, just a few lines, but packed with implications. DA Fani Willis has been deliberately suppressing public records. Internal memos related to her case against federal-level officials have been buried, redacted illegally, or destroyed. She's hiding something, and it's big. Pam Bondi, seated in her office overlooking the National Mall, read the memo with piercing eyes. She had dealt with her fair share of political games, but the idea that a district attorney, one who had garnered national headlines for prosecuting politically charged cases, could be in violation of the Georgia Open Records Act sent alarm bells ringing. Immediately, Bondi called for a preliminary inquiry. The DOJ's Transparency Task Force, newly empowered by executive orders issued by President Trump, had been cracking down on opaque practices by state officials who mishandled federal inquiries. Georgia's open records law, much like the Freedom of Information Act at the federal level, required public agencies to provide timely, unaltered access to public records upon request. Delays and denials without legal basis were illegal. Within a week, DOJ investigators arrived quietly in Atlanta, posing no grand spectacle. What they found in Fulton County was disturbing. Requests by journalists, watchdog groups, and even internal government agencies had been met with stalling tactics, stonewalling, and, in some cases, blatant misinformation. Internal communication logs, preserved via state IT backups, revealed that Fani Willis had ordered staff to delay until they forget in regard to politically sensitive requests. Bondi knew she couldn't go public until the evidence was airtight. She assembled a team of top legal minds to pore through the data, matching missing public records with legally mandated disclosures. It was a tedious process, but slowly, the pattern of concealment and manipulation became undeniable. Then came the breaking point. A former assistant DA, speaking under the condition of anonymity, came forward with explosive claims. According to the whistleblower, Willis had not only suppressed documents, she had used her office to target political opponents while simultaneously hiding all records that could connect her to improper communications with partisan activist groups and even outside donors. Pam Bondi, now burning with resolve, stepped into the media spotlight. At a hastily arranged press conference on a crisp Monday morning, she stood tall, flanked by legal aides and digital screens. Today, she said, we are announcing a formal federal investigation into District Attorney Fani Willis for willful violations of both state open records laws and federal oversight statutes. This is not about politics, this is about the rule of law. Reporters erupted with questions. Some from legacy media outlets tried to frame the investigation as a witch hunt, echoing tired narratives. But Bondi didn't flinch. What's political, she fired back, is silencing the public's right to know. What's political is weaponizing the courts and then destroying the evidence. The American people have a right to transparency regardless of who sits in office. Behind the scenes, the Georgia governor's office began to sweat. Bondi's move had put pressure on state leadership who had long avoided tangling with Willis, fearing political backlash. But now they were caught in the headlights of a federal spotlight. As the DOJ subpoenaed servers, employee logs, and internal communications, tensions escalated fast. And Fani Willis? She wasn't staying silent. In a dramatic press conference of her own, she struck back, this is nothing but retaliation. I've been investigating powerful people and now I'm being targeted for it. This is the federal government trying to intimidate local justice. But Bondi wasn't fazed. In her private war room, charts of missing files, logs of delayed FOIA responses, and affidavits from whistleblowers were now being compiled into what would become the case of the year. It was no longer just about missing documents. It was about accountability, corruption, and a reckoning long overdue. As the investigation advanced, Pam Bondi kept her team laser-focused. The stakes were climbing, and the public was now paying attention. Conservative media hailed Bondi as a crusader for government transparency, while mainstream outlets seemed cautious, not quite sure how to frame the escalating situation. But the facts were becoming too strong to ignore. Inside the Justice Department's command center, rows of analysts worked through forensic audits of Fulton County's digital infrastructure. Bondi had enlisted the help of a former NSA cyber forensic expert, now turned whistleblower advocate, to guide the team. Their mission: recover the digital paper trail Fani Willis had tried to erase. What they discovered shook Bondi to the core. Hundreds of internal emails had been deleted just minutes before federal subpoenas were issued, a clear sign of intentional obstruction. While most public officials know deleted files can often be recovered, the manner in which these files were erased suggested something more sophisticated. Willis's office had used third-party wiping software, unapproved and undocumented by the county's IT department. More damning still was a chain of Slack messages and texts retrieved through backup servers. The exchanges among Fani Willis and her top deputies revealed a pattern of deliberate cover-up. If anyone asks for this batch, tell them it's still in legal review. Keep delaying. We can't let the Bondi crowd see these. It'll blow everything wide open. Don't send anything until I greenlight. We stall. We delay. We redact. That's how we win. The messages were timestamped and verified. They showed intent. They showed coordination. And they showed a deep-rooted contempt for transparency. Bondi, reviewing the files late into the night, circled one message in red ink. Tell the press it's a clerical error. They always buy that. She set the file down, exhaled, and whispered to herself, not this time. Meanwhile, Fani Willis was growing increasingly hostile in her public appearances. Her rhetoric became fiery, almost desperate. In one CNN interview, she declared, "I'm being hunted by political dogs. Pam Bondi is Trump's attack dog, nothing more. The people of Georgia know this is about silencing black women in power." But the facts didn't care about narratives. Bondi knew she had to tread carefully. Every step had to be by the book. No leaks, no showboating. Just solid evidence. Behind closed doors, she met with her top DOJ ethics counsel. "We're preparing to file formal charges," she said flatly. "Not just obstruction. We're looking at willful violation of the Georgia Open Records Act under federal jurisdiction, conspiracy to tamper with public records, and potential abuse of office." The room went quiet. One advisor raised a hand cautiously. "Are we ready for the media onslaught?" Bondi didn't hesitate. "Let them scream. We'll speak with facts." In the heart of Atlanta, protesters began gathering outside the Fulton County Courthouse. Some were in support of Willis, claiming the investigation was political retribution. But others, especially local journalists and watchdog organizations, had a different tone. One reporter from the Atlanta Free Beacon shouted into a megaphone, "We requested records over a year ago. We were ignored, dismissed, and stonewalled. This is not about Trump. This is about the people's right to know." Inside the courthouse, Fani Willis was rapidly losing control of her own office. Several staff members resigned. 2 senior aides requested whistleblower protection through Bondi's office, offering access to internal documents in exchange for immunity. One memo they handed over was a bombshell. It was labeled Confidential Strategy Brief, Sensitive Targets, and it outlined Willis's plan to go after specific individuals connected to the Trump administration, not based on probable cause, but based on public optics and political leverage. Pam Bondi stared at the document. It was the smoking gun she didn't even know she needed. She turned to her deputy and said, "Draft the charges. We're going in." The following morning, headlines across the country erupted. Breaking: Attorney General Pam Bondi to file criminal charges against Fani Willis. Fulton County in crisis, DOJ uncovers massive records cover-up. The transparency reckoning has arrived. Bondi stood before the cameras once again, this time with iron in her voice. District Attorney Fani Willis has not only failed the people of Georgia, she has attempted to weaponize her office while evading the legal obligations of transparency and accountability. We will not stand by as the very fabric of public trust is shredded by corrupt practices. Today, we move forward with formal charges. The scene outside the Atlanta federal courthouse looked like something out of a political thriller. Media trucks lined the sidewalks, protesters held signs both for and against Fani Willis, and helicopters circled above for aerial coverage. Inside, tensions were at a boiling point. Pam Bondi, calm and collected in a dark navy suit, strode confidently through the halls, escorted by U.S. Marshals and flanked by federal prosecutors. Today wasn't just about appearances, today was the arraignment. After a grand jury handed down a 14-count indictment based on overwhelming evidence presented by Bondi's team, Fani Willis was now officially facing criminal charges. She walked in, defiant as ever, in a bright red blazer, her legal team trying to match her energy. Cameras weren't allowed inside the courtroom, but word spread quickly. This was not going to be a quiet legal process. The indictment accused Willis of 3 counts of violating the Georgia Open Records Act, 2 counts of conspiracy to obstruct justice, 4 counts of falsifying official documents, 1 count of abuse of public office, 4 counts of destruction of government records. Each charge carried serious weight. Together, they painted the portrait of a public official gone rogue, hiding behind her office while pushing a political agenda and evading the very transparency laws she was sworn to uphold. Pam Bondi's opening remarks in court were surgical. "Your Honor, this case is not about partisanship. It's about principle. It's not about politics. It's about public trust. We will demonstrate beyond any reasonable doubt that the defendant orchestrated a deliberate, sustained effort to withhold public information, destroy digital evidence, and manipulate justice. This was not negligence. This was premeditated deceit." The defense tried to strike back quickly. They accused Bondi of running a politically motivated witch hunt and framed the case as federal overreach into state jurisdiction. But the judge, a seasoned constitutionalist, was unimpressed. "This court is not here to entertain political theater," he warned sternly. "We are here to determine facts. And facts, unlike opinions, are not subject to emotion." What followed was a cascade of hard evidence that stunned even the most skeptical observers. Bondi's team rolled out redacted email threads, which had been previously denied to the press, now restored and exposed. In one internal note, a top deputy to Willis had written, "These FOIA people won't stop. If we keep pushing back and saying the files don't exist, they'll move on eventually." Bondi stood before the jury and raised a single eyebrow. Except the files did exist, and they were found deleted, hidden, renamed, and even stored on private Google Drives, completely outside the bounds of state protocol. Then came testimony from a key whistleblower, a former Fulton County data analyst, who nervously recounted the moment when she was told to delete logs and make sure there's no trace. "I was scared," she told the courtroom, "but I knew it wasn't right. I started backing things up at home, just in case. I didn't want to be part of a cover-up." The courtroom gasped. Bondi handed the witness a tissue, then turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a crime, and it was committed in broad daylight, under the false cover of justice." Outside the courtroom, the media war raged on. Major outlets finally began to acknowledge the seriousness of the case. Even some of Willis's former allies in state government started to distance themselves, quietly issuing statements about allowing the legal process to play out. One former Democratic state senator even appeared on a primetime interview, saying, "I was one of Fani's biggest supporters. But if these allegations are true, and so far they look pretty solid, then this goes far beyond party. It's a violation of everything we claim to stand for." In D.C., President Trump was briefed personally by Bondi. He nodded slowly as she laid out the case and said simply, "The swamp is deeper than we thought. But you, Pam, are doing exactly what needs to be done." Meanwhile, social media exploded with support from Americans who had long felt like transparency was dead. Pam Bondi is a boss. Finally, someone's holding these people accountable. Justice isn't about red or blue. It's about truth. And Bondi's bringing the heat. As the trial moved forward, Bondi wasn't just winning in court. She was winning the hearts of a public long disillusioned with double standards in justice. But the biggest twist was still to come. By the third week of the trial, Pam Bondi's case against Fani Willis had grown stronger than even her closest allies expected. More whistleblowers came forward, new digital evidence surfaced, and public opinion was beginning to swing hard. What had once been dismissed by mainstream pundits as a partisan witch hunt was now the most talked about legal drama in the country. And yet, Bondi knew one final move was needed to secure a conviction, one strategic checkmate that would leave no doubt in the jury's mind. That moment came when her team subpoenaed a former contractor who had worked for Fulton County's legal compliance office. His name was Marcus Drayton, a quiet man with no prior political ties. For years, he had maintained server backups for the county without incident until suddenly, one day, he was let go without explanation. Drayton stepped onto the witness stand with a thick folder of files and a calm demeanor. What he revealed would make national headlines. I kept copies of everything. Off-site, encrypted, for liability reasons. I knew it could be illegal to destroy public records, and when I saw them being wiped on orders from the top, I made sure there was a trail. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Pam Bondi slowly stood and asked, Mr. Drayton, can you confirm that these files include full, unredacted versions of documents Fani Willis claimed had either never existed or were accidentally lost? Drayton nodded. I can confirm that, yes. Bondi turned toward the jury. The defense told you this was all a misunderstanding. That documents were lost in clerical errors or system failures. But now we know the truth. Not only were these files real, they were deliberately destroyed and only preserved because one honest man feared for the law. She then dropped her final card, in internal voicemail retrieved from the encrypted archives. It was Fani Willis's own voice, angry, frustrated. I don't care what the law says, we're not handing those files over. Not while that blonde pitbull is sniffing around. Bondi's just another Trump lackey. Delete it. Burn it. I don't care. Gasps erupted. One juror's eyes widened. Another leaned forward, visibly shaken. Bondi looked to the judge. Your Honor, I move to admit this as Exhibit 67, clear audio evidence of the defendant ordering the illegal destruction of public records. The defense objected loudly. They claimed the audio was illegally obtained. But Bondi's team had anticipated this. The files had been gathered with a lawful subpoena, verified through digital signature chains, and authenticated by an independent cybersecurity firm. The judge allowed it. The trap had sprung. Outside the courtroom, the national media could no longer ignore the gravity of the case. CNN, MSNBC, and even NPR started covering the trial wall-to-wall. The headlines were relentless. Bombshell voicemail exposes Fani Willis in DOJ trial. Whistleblower backup destroys Willis's defense strategy. Bondi's case now bulletproof, legal experts say. Pam Bondi, when asked for comment by a Fox News reporter, gave a calm but sharp statement. This isn't about party. This is about power and how it corrupts when it's unchecked. The people deserve better than elected officials who think they're above the law. The statement resonated. Her approval rating soared. Even moderate and independent voters began to rally behind her. In coffee shops, at gas stations, and across social media, everyday Americans were glued to the unfolding saga. A trending hashtag lit up Twitter and Instagram. Hashtag Bondi breaks the swamp. Inside the courtroom, the defense team began to crumble. Willis refused a plea deal, reportedly yelling at her attorneys behind closed doors and blaming everyone but herself. Her staff began lawyering up. The DA's office, once a bastion of progressive prosecutions and politically charged cases, was now a shell of its former self. And then, in a dramatic cross-examination, Bondi delivered the final dagger. Standing across from Fani Willis herself, who had reluctantly taken the stand in her own defense, Bondi's tone was controlled but firm. Ms. Willis, did you or did you not authorize the use of unauthorized third-party software to delete internal emails related to federal FOIA requests? Willis hesitated, then answered, I don't recall. Bondi didn't blink. Let me refresh your memory. She played a screen recording showing Willis logged into the very system in question, clicking through emails, selecting files, and hitting delete. Willis looked down. The courtroom was silent. I'll ask again, Bondi said. Did you authorize those deletions? This time, there was no answer. The judge adjourned the court for the day. Everyone knew what was coming next. The morning of the verdict felt different. Downtown Atlanta was gridlocked. Security was heightened. Protesters and supporters of both sides lined the streets with homemade signs and megaphones. Reporters were elbow to elbow on the courthouse steps, each jockeying for the best angle, the first soundbite, the breaking headline. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Every seat was taken. You could feel the weight of the moment in the air, like a pressure system about to erupt. Pam Bondi stood tall and steady, eyes fixed on the jury box. Fani Willis sat at the defense table, her arms folded tightly across her chest, lips pursed, her defiance slowly replaced by a flicker of dread. The jury entered. 12 Americans, black, white, Hispanic, blue-collar, and white-collar, young and old. They had deliberated for less than 48 hours. That alone spoke volumes. The judge turned to the jury foreman. Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict? The foreman, a middle-aged man with a blue tie and a solemn expression, stood. "Yes, Your Honor, we have." He handed the verdict form to the bailiff, who gave it to the judge. The judge reviewed it silently, then handed it back to the foreman to read aloud. On count 1, violation of the Georgia Open Records Act, guilty. On count 2, conspiracy to obstruct justice, guilty. On count 3, destruction of government records, guilty. On count 4, falsifying official documents, guilty. And on it went. Guilty, guilty, guilty. 14 counts in total. 14 guilty verdicts. Gasps, tears, cheers, and a single piercing cry from a woman in the gallery who had supported Willis from the beginning. Willis's jaw dropped. Her attorneys went pale. One reached over to place a hand on her shoulder, but she shook him off. The illusion of power was gone. She was no longer the fearless DA who had once proudly taken on her political enemies. She was now a convicted felon facing up to 45 years in prison. The judge's gavel came down sharply. "Ms. Willis, the court will reconvene for sentencing next month. Until then, you are remanded into federal custody without bail. This court is adjourned." As marshals moved in, Fani Willis tried to speak, to protest, to lash out, but Bondi didn't even look her way. She calmly gathered her case notes, gave a respectful nod to the jury, and walked out of the courtroom like a woman who had just delivered a reckoning. The legal community was in shock. This wasn't just a conviction, it was a symbol. A line in the sand. A message that no one was above the law, not even the enforcers of the law themselves. On Capitol Hill, lawmakers scrambled to respond. Some Democrats called it a tragic fall from grace, while Republicans hailed it as a monumental victory for transparency. President Trump praised Bondi in a televised address from the White House. Pam Bondi did what few have had the courage to do. She held corrupt power to account with precision, with professionalism, and with an unshakable dedication to the rule of law. Bondi, ever measured, held a press conference that evening. She stood behind the Department of Justice podium, American flag behind her, her voice calm but resolute. This case was never about politics. It was about trust. The American people deserve to know that their public servants are accountable, that we serve them, not our own ambitions or ideologies. Let this be a message to anyone who thinks they can bend or break the law for personal gain. We will find you. We will expose you. And we will prosecute you. The crowd erupted in applause. Across cable news, even some left-leaning pundits admitted Bondi had set a new bar for public integrity. But perhaps the most moving moment came days later when a Georgia mother who had filed one of the original FOIA requests and had been ignored for years stood before cameras in tears. "I never thought anyone would care about what happened in our little county. But Pam Bondi cared. She fought for people like me, people who just wanted the truth. And because of her, we got it." Fani Willis was later sentenced to 22 years in federal prison with no chance of parole for the first 15. Her legacy, once championed by activists and progressives, was erased in disgrace. Pam Bondi, meanwhile, became a national icon. Her approval rating skyrocketed. There was even talk of a future Supreme Court nomination. But she never changed. When asked about her meteoric rise in an interview with Bret Baier, she simply said, "I didn't do this to be famous. I did it because the law matters. And if we don't fight to protect it, we lose the country." In the hearts of millions of Americans, left, right, and in between, that answer was more than enough.